Learning how to create environments in Unreal Engine 4 can be a tricky and daunting topic. Fortunately, our good friend Andre is here to enlighten us with a ton of tips and tricks. In this breakdown, you're going to learn how to model simple grass geometry in Blender. After that, we're going to learn how to take the grass you made and import it into Unreal Engine 4 and create a beautiful flowing grassy field, complete with flowers, wind patterns, and color variation. As a bonus, we're also going to learn about creating and texturing your own trees and rocks to use in your projects. If you want to learn more about stylized texturing, consider joining Stylized Station's coloring book, a course specifically designed to teach you how to become a texture artist. I'll leave a link in the description for those who want to check it out. Now, let's get into the video.
Hey guys, my name is Andre Felipe, and I'm a junior environment artist from Brazil. I was invited by Stylized Station to talk a bit about my latest stylized scene, Paradiso Viato, which is the second piece of my ongoing Paradiso series of environments. So in this video breakdown, I'll be talking a bit about why I made the scene, the methodology behind it, and my thought process throughout, as well as my mindset going into the scene and going to stylized art and art in general. And I'll also be talking about how I made the grass shader, and how I made the trees and the tree shaders as well as composition and yeah, all of those points. So if you're interested in any of those, stay tuned. Now, just hopping in Blender real quick to show you how I prepared my mesh for the shader we have in our scene. This is pretty standard when you're making grass, either realistic or stylized. But we need a grass that looks like this. In Blender, these are the vertex normals, these pink lines. If you want to show them, just go over to this panel in edit mode and click over here, and then it's right the second. You can also show other normal information, but this is what we want, the vertex normals, and they should be pointing up, just like this one. And you can see the back faces are black. That's why we use the two-sided lighting fix on the engine. But yeah. So this is an example of how it turned out before I edited in normals. And you can see that there's a difference in shading. This one's pretty flat, but this one has its shading still. And that's not what we want. And so just going over a bit, this is the grass strand I started with. And it's pretty standard, just modeled it out. And it's pretty dense as well, but I wanted a larger density because of the wind animations and stuff. And so anyway, just modeled it. And then after I modeled it, I just stamped it around and modified it using the proportional editing tool, which if you press O, first you press O and then you press G or any sort of move. But yeah, and then you use your mouse wheel to adjust how big the area of the proportional edit is. And so yeah, and it works on every axis too. You can also edit how you want it to, if you want it to be like smooth or sphere-like or sharp, linear. Anyway, you can edit the sort of the mask, I guess. The fall off, yeah, the fall off type, yeah. All right. So yeah, here's your grass strand. Just stamp it around. There's another plane passing. All right, so after you've picked up your grass strand and copied it and made a cluster just like this, you can see that each one is separated right now. They're not joined together, and they all have the default vertex normals. That's okay. We're gonna join all of them. And these normals are all over the place, but yeah. And that's the one we ended up with over here. And now I'm gonna show you how to go from this to this. Alright, so in order to edit the normals to go from this to this. I'm going to show you right now what you need to do. I just like having it at the 0 of the world. So we're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to press A, and then we're going to press Alt N, normals, like N as in normals. So now this opens up the normal editing menu, right? And we are going to click point to target. And then we're going to click anywhere. It doesn't matter where you click, because down here we're going to have this menu, point normals to target. And then we can just pick up the z-axis and just put like a crazy number. Alright, now it's all pointing up, and that's it. Now you have the absolute same result. Just the pivot is a bit different on this one because I hadn't edited it yet. But this one is the one in Engine. But it's fine having the pivot over here, because then the grass will stick a bit under the ground and it will look more cohesive. Because even in stylized art, most elements still need to make sense, right? So you don't want grass floating or stuff like that. So it's pretty straightforward, and now you know how to edit meshes normals. So going over a bit about how I made the grass in the scene, and talking a bit about some of the questions that people have, and just going over my workflow for it. I chose to do geometry-based grass strands, and so each of these grass strands is a plane, and just cluster it up. I feel like this looks better for stylized art, and some people might argue that it's not as performant for a game, and they might be right in most cases. But there are games out there that use geometry grass strands, like Genshin Impact, and that game performs very well. So it's definitely doable. And this scene is overall performing very well, even though I didn't put any LODs on the grass, and it's everywhere. There's a ton of grass, like 166k, and each of these have like like 300 trees, like triangles. So it's fairly dense, and it's running pretty well. But I wouldn't, if this was a game, like I would optimize this a bit better, and I'll show you the mesh later. But yeah, so it's mesh grass. I will go over the shader itself. This is a material instance. I'll go over the shader, but let me just show you some of the functionality for it. So I talked a bit about how gradients are so important, and so I wanted the grass to be darker at the closer to the ground and lighter at the top, so I made a gradient for it, and a lot of the controls here are based on that gradient. Just a heads up, I made this grass with the conventional method of just making a normal material, but the best way to do this nowadays, and Jeremy Strelato is doing it in his Dynasty Empire scene on his streams, is using runtime virtual textures to dynamically texture the grass based on the ground. And that would be, in my opinion, nowadays the best way to do this grass. I could have done it that way, but that would entail like more studying that I was willing to make for this scene specifically, because the focus of this scene was composition and grass, right? And just the grass workflow. And I would need to study something specific to Unreal, which is runtime virtual texturing, and I wasn't really up for that for this scene in particular. But for my next scenes, I will definitely use runtime virtual texture, because it's crazy. Just look it up. It's crazy. It's a game changer, definitely. But for this scene, I did not use it, but I feel like I made a good job of blending the ground and the grass. Like it looks cohesive, just not from the top, which I kind of dislike. But yeah, I'm just showing you the nitty gritty of the scene itself. But from this angle, it looks really good. So we have the color of the base, and so let's change this to pink. So you can see, and the color is fluctuating because there are wind lines going through, and I'll show that to you later. But so the base is now pink, right? The base is blue, and you can change like the color, whatever you need, right? Let me just go back to default. The color of the tip, which is the same thing. So now it's pink. now it's blue, etc. So it's just a simple gradient, and I'm assigning colors to it. I've got color variation sliders, and so if I put this to, say, red, so vibrant red, you can see that some of the grass, and this is a world space map, and it's a texture, it's a grayscale map that maps these different colors to the grass. And so color variation 2 would be just a smaller scale. So you can see, so let's put this as pink and the other as red, so you can see it better. And so the red is sort of more, it's larger scale, and the second one is smaller scale. So the grass wind strength affects the world position sort of gradient. And some of these sliders down here do the same thing. But if you wanted like a more larger scale slider for it, here it is. Roughness is what you would expect. Speed U and speed V is the wind line speed. Variation map size is the color variation map size. And so let me just change the color again so you can see how it varies. And let me, yeah, so this is world space, and so if I wanted more variation or less variation, like this is larger scale, and this is like smaller scale variation, so you can change it like this. Wind intensity is what you would expect, so let's put this to like 3. So the wind is more intense, and the grass does this like wavy, and it's sort of mesmerizing it, and I really like it. And it works well like this because of how dense the grass strands are, and I'll show you the mesh later. But it works pretty well like this because of how dense the grass is. The wind line size is the size of those wind lines that I showed you before. Let me change the color again. And so you can see the wind lines passing through. And so if you raise that, the wind lines are bigger. And sometimes they go faster as well because of the scale. But here they are like smaller. And so it's the same thing as the color variation map, but this time with the wind lines. The wind speed, and these wind speed, wind weight, and word position offset amount is just your normal simple grass wind parameters, right? So the wind speed, wind weight, which like sweeps it. That's so weird. But yeah, and it's like, oh my god, you can really just bug this. But anyway, yeah. So this is just a wind weight. You can play with it in small increments, and it will look great. And the world position offset amount is how much the wind lines affect the grass. You can see that when the wind lines pass, it kind of yanks the grass when there's a high value, and so that's what it's for. And now I'll go over a bit about the shader itself. So I'm going to talk about the grass shader I made for the scene now. And I'm just going to go over each of these blocks and tell you what they're doing and how they fit into the overall shader. And I hope that by the end you have a pretty good understanding of how this works and how it's built, and you can reproduce it yourself. But if you still have any inquiries, you feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message in my ArtStation, and I'll be sure to help you. Just getting this out of the way now, I've got this use albedo map switch over here. The reason this is here is because the grass and these flowers use the same material, but only the flowers have an albedo map, which is just a color atlas. But this is why this is here. So just pushing this aside, we can talk about the main grass shader. So talking about these two blocks, the base color and the color variation, we've got two colors, which is the base of the grass strand and the tip of the grass strand, and the color variation 1 and 2 are basically the same thing. These two are being lerped, so linearly interpolated by a mask, and this one also by the same mask. the grass strand gradient mask. What's going on here is that I've got a linear gradient and it outputs a U and V, but I've got the V, so the X and Y, so I've got the vertical axis here, and I'm running it through a 1 minus node. What the 1 minus node does is it inverts a grayscale picture. And so before we had the black at the top and the white at the bottom, and now we inverted that. And we're running it through a multiply just to get a control in the material instance later. So this is a scalar parameter called gradient strength. So just so we get a control over how this looks, right? Because if we want to change how strong the gradient is later and how it affects our colors, now we can because we have this control over. And so after the grass strand gradient mask, these two are also being lerped by another mask, which is the world space color variation mask. What this component over here is doing is it's tiling this mask across our entire world instead of across every single mesh. This gets us a larger scale mask to play with our color variation. The way we do this is we divide our absolute world position by a scalar parameter. This gets us a control over how much this tiles, the mask tiles. And after this, we mask the R and G channels, which is the X and Y, or the U and V, and we just plug it into the UV, and now it tiles across our entire world. So you can see over here, we got this two-sided normal lightning fix. I actually want to show this to you on my trees instead of my grass because it's way more apparent. All right, so let me show you over here. All right, so this is our normal fix. Let me disconnect it. Just pay attention to the trees. I'm just gonna apply and. All right, so I don't know if you can see this, but this is a two-sided material, right? And so these are the back faces. They are way darker than the other faces, right? The front-facing faces. So what this normal lighting fix does is we flip the back faces, right? So they receive the same lighting as the original faces. And so basically this gets treated by the renderer as if it was not like a two-sided material mesh, but an actual mesh with two faces. So here it is. Like the back faces receive the same light as the other. And so this gives like this uniform sort of lighting to it all, right? So it looks much better than just having very dark. And I'm using that on the grass as well, but I feel like the tree example kind of highlights how this little thing, like these just simple, like just this, can make a huge difference. And then we can just go back to our grass master over here, and I'll talk a bit about the wind now and how it comes into play. So this is the grass strand world position mask. So this is just the name I gave, and prevents ground wiggle. Ground wiggle is when, when you apply simple grass wind to a mesh that doesn't have vertex paint or isn't like stuck to the ground, and the base of it just wiggles. So this fixes that. And so we got a simple grass wind and our vertex normal for our mesh, and we're lerping these based on the gradient. So we're only gonna apply grass wind where our gradient lets us, and so where the gradient is white. Where it's black, it won't receive any of these, so it won't receive any world position offset. And this the simple grass wind is just the normal parameters I'm using. I'm just using wind intensity, speed, and weight. But where this really shines is the additional world position offset, where I said I was going to explain later. So this is later. we've got our wind lines here. And so we're multiplying that by a world position amount just to get a different strength on it and connecting it to our additional world position offset. So what's going on here is that every time the wind lines pass, not only do the colors change, but also the world position offset changes. And this is illustrated better when I just come over here and show you. Where is my material? Here it is. So if we go over here to the world position offset amount, and I've showed you this before, but just put it into perspective and we raise it, you can see that every time a wind line passes, it just yanks the grass, right? Like look, and it's so high that it kind of falls apart, but this is just to illustrate it. So every time a wind line passes, it changes the world position offset. And so the default is 3 because it's so subtle. Like, look, you can get a rolling wind over here, and it just looks so great. And so that's what that one is doing. Now over here, under the world space color variation mask, we have more color controls. This is the wind line colors. So basically every time a wind line sweeps, I want the color to change, right? And so we got the base and the tip just like before, and then we lerp this based on the same gradient as to have global control over the gradient. And so if we change this one here, it will change it all across the other colors. And in turn, this color wind lerp node is lerped by the wind line mask. This mask controls the panning wind lines we see across our grass, and it's colored by these two. So this is the color and this is the mask, just like before. And let me break this down to you. This is basically the same thing as the world space color variation mask, but now it pans across our world. So this creates a rolling wind effect. We got our absolute world position divided by a scalar parameter. This is our tiling, masked again. This is our U and V. But now it connects to a panner node. The panner node receives a coordinate, which is the U and V, but it also receives a speed in the form of an x and y speed, a vector 2. And so here we're creating a vector 2 with this append containing a speed u and a speed v. This is our speed x and speed y. We're appending these two in order to create a vector 2 to connect into our speed, and then just connecting it to the uv later. I will explain what this is doing once we get to this guy, but for now, this component ends here. So after the world position offset amount, I think that covers everything. I don't think I left stones unturned. This, I just think I didn't talk too much about this gradient, but this is the exact same as this one. I think, except I saturated it. What this does is basically clamps the, it says here, it clamps the value between 0 and 1. I like this better than clamp. It gives me better results most of the time. And so I clamped it because this was exceeding the 0 to 1 range. And so I clamped it in order to connect it to the lerp and get better results. And all of this connects to the world position offset, of course. And I think this is it for the material. I can cover the tree material and the totem material as well. I think I'll do that now. I also wanted to go over how the trees are set up and how I modified the shader from my previous scene, because it didn't quite look like I wanted them to in my previous scene, and I really tweaked the material and changed how they look into this one and gave myself more control over it. And so the mesh itself is fairly simple. It's just a bunch of planes proportionally edited, just like the grass, to slant a bit, to be more curved. And I painted the texture in Photoshop over the plane's UVs, and I just rotated it around and composited the tree and paid attention to the silhouette. Just made the silhouette look interesting. So the mesh is just pretty straightforward. It's basically just a bunch of planes rotated around and curved and stuff. But where this really shines is the material that I made for it. So it's fairly similar to the grass material in terms of controls that I made, but this one is way simpler. But it has color 1 and color 2, and this is basically the color of the tip and the color of the core, and sort of closer to the middle. So you can see I have control over the tip color and also the gradient power, and so how much of each color appears. So I can make the core of the tree a darker shade of green and the tip a lighter shade of green. I went for a very neutral look for the trees in the scene, so you can barely tell that there's a difference in color. But once you start tweaking it, it looks pretty apparent. Like the trees are way darker in the middle if you tweak it, and way lighter. And so it's good to have this kind of control, and I'll just show you how I made it, but it's fairly similar to the grass. First of all, I set the roughness to a value, just a normal scalar parameter over here. This is the opacity mask that I made for the trees, and so you can tell over here. This is the two-sided lighting fix, just a normal fix, which I showed before in the grass shader overview. And so now we go. Oh, so I ended up not using this, but it's the same world space color variation mask for our grass, but I ended up not applying it to the trees. I didn't think it looked okay. And so these two are also unused. All right, cut the part where I come into this material. I'm just gonna clean the material up because it's full of junk and I didn't realize this. And just show the next video instead. I'm gonna re-record this part. I'm just gonna organize this. Alright, so just going over how the tree material is set up now. I've got just your simple scalar parameter for the roughness over here because I don't have a roughness map, but I do have an opacity mask, and here it is. And this is the two-sided lighting fix for the normals that I showed you before in our grass shader. It's the same one. And here we have our albedo. So basically I already had an albedo map for this. So what I did was I desaturated it to make it black and white. So if we can just preview this. There's a Fortnite picture on my albedo map because I was using the trees as reference. And so I forgot to remove it, but that's okay. Like the UVs are only using this part. So if you wanted to optimize your texel density for this kind of albedo map, you should probably have the painting on the diagonal over here so that you cover more UV space. But it's fine like this. But if you're doing this, I would recommend you to do it on the diagonal so you get more UV space and more resolution texel density. So I desaturated it so to get it black and white, and I did the same thing as the grass. So this would be the base color and the tip color, or actually the opposite. So yeah, this would be the tip and this would be the base. And I'm lerping it based on a linear gradient, a vertical linear gradient that I inverted using 1- node that I'm powering through the scalar parameter. And it's the exact same color control that I have on the grass, but this time on the trees. And I'm just adding it to our albedo so that I get the nice detail that I had on the albedo already. And I'm adding it to the lerp and the two colors and plugging into our base color. So it's pretty simple. And that gets us the results that we got in the scene, the controls that we have in the scene. And so I didn't change anything, I just compiled it again. But yeah, this is how the shader was built. All right, and now I think that the last sort of material that I wanted to show you guys is the totem material. It has some interesting gradient controls, but they're very similar to our grass and trees. So we have a choice over here to use the overlay or not. So when we turn it on, this is a switch parameter. When we turn it on, we can see all of these other parameters. And so just showing you what they're doing. We have two colors, and this one's way too dark. All right, we have two colors, and there's a gradient going from top to bottom, and we can control the gradient power over here, so we can see which of the colors we want to see more, or how the variation works. And this is the intensity of that overlay. And so right now, I want to show you how all of that is being done inside of our material. And just talking a bit about the mesh itself, this is, I made a blockout mesh in Blender, then exported it out to ZBrush, sculpted it, passed it on to Substance Painter, and baked it down to a low poly, and here it is. And here we have our normal that we obtain in Substance, and this is an occlusion roughness metallic mask. Yeah, pretty straightforward. So over here, just getting this out of the way, this is a switch parameter. So when it's true, we get one node tree, and when it's false, we get another one. So when this one is true, we get this whole shenanigans over here. And when it's false, we just get the albedo, and it just connects to the base color input. Over here, we got our base, and this would be our top and base color because I'm not inverting our linear gradient over here, but I'll get to that. This is our top and bottom color. It's being lerped by a mask, which is our famous linear gradient. And I got the vertical gradient and did not 1 minus it. So this isn't inverted. So the black is at the top and the white is at the bottom. All that changes is the order of these two. And you could also plug them into the different inputs. So this one is at A, I could plug this at B, and this one at A. It would make a difference. So that's just a choice. And this is the scalar parameter driving the effect. Saturate to clamp it between 0 and 1 because I was getting weird values on this one. And from the lerp, we connect this to a blend overlay. What the blend overlay does is it basically overlays all of these colors on top of our albedo. And what I'm doing here is powering it through a scalar parameter just to control the intensity. What the power node does is basically sort of a contrast control that you're going to have. So this is good to have in order to control the intensity of our effect. That connects to true. So when you use overlays true, we're going to use all of these options and overlay them on top of the base color albedo. And that's pretty much it. Right, now on to talking a bit about how I thought up the composition for the scene. First of all, I started out with the focal point. I knew that the totem was going to be my focal point, even though it's not the strongest of focal points. It was still a driving force to composite the whole scene, and so the whole scene is built around making the totem the focal point, and that's very important. Even more important if you have a stronger focal point. And so if you had something more detailed over here, like a house or I don't know, a weapon maybe on a stone and it's very detailed, maybe I don't know that. So, but the main subject of study here was making a strong composition, and that means driving all the focus towards your focal point. And that's what I wanted to do, even though my focal point wasn't as strong. It was just a study in composition. And everyone I showed the scene to knew right away that the focal point was the totem. And so I succeeded in my objective, even though the focal point isn't as strong as I would like it to be. But since making an overly detailed prop was not the subject of this study round, I didn't worry too much because my objective was accomplished, which was making a strong composition and making great grass. So I started up Unreal, just put the totem on top of the mesh I already had, and all of these cliffs I already had from my previous scene, and I just reused them and stamped them around to get a compositional block out. And so over here you can see that we have a lot of slanted lines all pointing towards the totem, even over here. And then and we also have less detail over here and more detail over here so that our eyes can rest on our focal point. Now going forward, I really wanted to put the waterfall. I just didn't know exactly where to put it in order to keep my composition balanced. And so I just flipped it around a bunch to see where it would land. But at the end, I figured, since I'm using these slanted lines, right, and the focal point is going to stay here, maybe I should just raise the cliffs and put the waterfall there to see how it would look. First, I don't have the screenshot, but I tested out the waterfall here before I made the cliffs and stuff, and the waterfall over here made sense. And so I just put some cliffs around it to make even more sense. Right now, as you can see, the scale of the waterfall isn't ideal. I also played around some of the trees at some slanted angles. At the end, some of these angles did not make sense, and that's a feedback I received, and I agree with, and I just haven't adjusted the scene yet. So be careful as to make the scene, even though it's a stylized scene, as I said before, it should be cohesive and natural. That's the feedback I received, and I agree with it. So this tree in particular is too slanted towards the other direction, and in fact the direction doesn't actually reflect what I wanted. So the direction should be more towards our focal point, but this is hindsight. So we have the slanted cliffs as well driving our focus. So, and just going forward, this is the composition that I landed with. And so the rest would be just fine-tuning. So you can see over this in this area, I thought that it was too raised. So I lowered it a bit and made it more slanted and more pointing as to clearly define the line. So this is a more defined line. I also refined the details on the waterfall and the cliffs behind there. This next one is a more finalized look, as you can see. So the trees are at their final position, and I've already fixed their normal. So you can see here we have we have the black back faces that we don't want. So we have a more smooth back faces over here. And now we have the wisps. And overall, there isn't much change in structure after this point. From this point on, there isn't much change in the scene structure overall. I just changed details around because the composition is already laid out, and so it's very clear that our focal point is the totem, and everything in the scene is driving towards it. And here I added 2 stones, and they also have a slanted angle pointing towards our totem. And now I change the grass around until we get to our final result over here. And you can see, at the end I received the feedback that the waterfall didn't really feel like a waterfall because of the scale, and I agreed. And so I opened it up a bit, as you can see, and I removed this tree because I felt that it didn't really fit. I removed the tree, and so and added the scale of the waterfall as well, and so it's more cohesive this way. And I thought it looked better, and it really does. Because this one is too tall, and I don't know, I'm missing the little fall off here, the little gap that you would usually have. So this looks more like a water spout because it's protruding way too much from the land over here. And so not this one. This one looks like it's a river and then it falls off into a waterfall. It's more cohesive this way. Now, just jumping back into Unreal and talking a bit more about composition. I don't know if you're familiar with the photography concept the rule of thirds, but it basically divides your picture into 3 sectors using guiding lines, and where those lines intersect is where the viewer's eyes will be led to when they're looking at your picture. And so you can do this in Unreal by going up here in the top left corner into perspective and clicking cinematic viewport. This will change your viewport style. And then we can just go to our main camera here and pilot it. And over here in the top right corner, you can now see that there's a composition overlay, and you can put the grid up. So I'm going to be explaining how I laid out my scene based on this, because from the start I already had this overlay on top of my scene. So I laid out the elements based on this 3x3 grid. I think first of all, as I said, the rule of thirds dictates that where these points intersect is where interesting things is where you want interesting things in your scene or focal points to be located at. And so the totem at first wasn't in this intersecting point. And I think it's important to mention that my scene is pretty wide. And so this leads to some mistakes being made. And this is hindsight, right? But in hindsight, this side is much heavier in detail than this side. The left side is pretty empty, so it needs more detail. But this is hindsight, and this is feedback I received. And just talking a bit more about, and this is just me talking a bit more about what I learned in terms of composition from this scene and from feedback that I received. So I just wanted to show you this because it puts into perspective what kind of thought needs to be put into compositing your scene inside of Unreal, and not just when you're planning it out and stuff. And so this tree is very important. I like the slanted angle of it, and it's sort of the focal tree. And you can see that behind it, I didn't put any trees or anything. So there's a gap between this one tree and this tree, just so that this tree can extend upwards into it because it's a focal point, right? And the same with the totem. I put one tree here and one tree here, and none behind it, directly behind it, because this is our focal point. Alright guys, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to thank Stylized Station for the opportunity, and stay safe, practice hard. If you guys need anything or you have any doubts or inquiries, feel free to shoot me a message on ArtStation or just send me an email. If you want to show me your art, if you want feedback, anything, I'm completely free and available. So just shoot me a message and I'll definitely respond. Thank you for watching the video until the end, if you did watch it through to the end. And don't give up. Just keep chasing your dreams and go after breaking into the industry. You are bound to succeed. Thank you so much, and see you next time.